Welcome to the Smiling Fox, a Mythic Bastionland podcast. My name is Horst.
I am Brian.
I'm Jesse.
And hey, I'm William.
In today's episode, we want to dissect myths. If you look at a typical myth, let's pick the Plague because it's the first one. They have a name, a poem, illustration, the omens, the cast, a 2d6 table, and then some of the elements are repeated in the prompts. My first question is, do you mention the name of the myth?
Very rarely. Often I have players just guess what it is. If you come across the troll, they're like, oh, hey, look, there's a troll here.
But do you refer to the myth as the troll? Like, do you have NPCs, for example, mentioned, oh, well, we have seen the troll, or have you heard about the plague?
They talk about the beast in the north. I guess that the plague kind of makes sense, but they'll sooner call it like the Black Death or something like that.
I introduce it based on the omens and whatever information would be available to the people in the omens. That's what the players will get. I'm not really sure what an alternative would be, so I'm interested to hear if people have considered doing different things, like reading out the poem at the beginning of the myth. So does anyone do that?
I have occasionally used the poem as like something that a NPC in the world, whether it's like a vassal or a seer or something, will just blurt out randomly at some point. So I'll try to incorporate that just for flavor because they're great. But I think I'm like y'all, I don't really ever use the names specifically. The Plague is a good example because that's one of the ones that some of my players have most interacted with. And after the last Omen and things had completely come undone, they finally said, oh, this might be a plague.
And for the poem, I would say that having the seers to read the poem, because as Jesse said, it is super evocative. It doesn't give too much away. It's vague enough that a seer could say stuff like that.
There are some omens that also have like people singing or reciting, and I think that's a good moment to use the poem as well. There's the White has a dude who's cleaning clothing, and he sings this song about nights, and I just forgo that and just went straight to the poem and just incorporated that into a song.
The Bet definitely has a song that in-game, I think, a bard sings.
The Bet says, spoil the loaf, taint the wine, to starve a fiend is most
divine, which is incredibly sinister. But the bard sings something else. The great winged one grows and we are the feast. But it is something that an in-game, like a diegetic way to have NPCs quote the poem. And I know that Chris had a blog post about using the illustrations as a spark table result almost. Like if you flip through the book, you look at an illustration and you take inspiration from there. Do you use the illustration in any way like that?
I have used it before for fleshing out landmarks, just adding small little details here and there, but I don't really use them for myths that much.
So for example, if I look at the illustration of the Plague, which is metal as fuck, and Chris, if you're listening, can I have a t-shirt, please? It does have some kind of crucified person in the foreground and some kind of monk. And I'm already kind of daydreaming about how to incorporate these elements into the game. So I do think that can be useful to inform the way you run it.
The book is very well designed that you can open up on a 2-page spread and have a night and a plague. And you also have the prompts down at the bottom of the pages for each. And even if you ignore the broader concepts of the game, like the hex crawl rules and the map and everything, there's enough there that you could run a session of kind of a loose rules light game with plenty of story prompts. You've got an interesting character. You've got multiple characters because you've got a seer as well. And that artwork there, in that case, I think is very evocative, and you can apply that if you're using the book in that way. It tends not to be how I approach it, because usually when we encounter a new myth, there's probably enough structure around the session with other things that are planned, and they're on a journey with an intention to go somewhere. And it probably, because I've got enough going on in my head, it wouldn't occur to me to say, I'll throw in a guy who's being crucified here, even though it's not in the text.
Yeah, I think for my part, the plague is a good example too, because it's one of the first ones I had contact with. And the art, I did use that bottom left chunk where you see like the girl and like her family. I was very tired that day. I was running stuff for everyone. And so I was just looking for any way to come up with anything. And my usual processes weren't really working for me. So I just went to the spread while the players were talking, and that thing kind of stuck out to me in the moment. And so by the time we hit that omen, I had a much more vivid and evocative vibe for like the demeanor of the daughter when she like actually walks on screen, the folks, because we did end up going to meet the folks on top of a mountain, which was cool.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something I've learned to do more after that specific moment. Is the spread helps me depending on what day it is for me as a ref. Like high energy days, I'm often going to the omens or the cast or the sparks at the bottom, or asking a lot of questions from players and using the stuff that they say and express as like sparks to, combine with the myth. But on days when I'm like really tired, sometimes it is just as simple as, cool, like what is a cool thing on this page right now? And oftentimes the first thing that I'll go to is either the poem because it's vibey, or the art because image immediately gets an idea into my head.
It's interesting that you mentioned the poem as well. For the plague, it already foreshadows the way the plague could spread, but that is undecided until we roll on the 2d6 table. What is the function of these tables?
In the session, in the moments, I find myself forgetting to use them quite often. But one of the benefits about running the game for longer periods of time is also knowing tables from different myths, that you just need a prompt for something and you remember, hey, when I ran this myth, there was something cool.
Has anyone had a 2d6 table result that is related to the myth that dramatically changed the way the myth represented itself? Like, I do remember that I rolled on the elf and he doesn't show emotion and he hates the ugly, and that gave me a very clear way to characterize the creature.
The 2d6 table is a really good way to place extra emphasis, give the myth more momentum. But it's cool when you're running the sun and all of a sudden you get like wildfire. There are some hexes close by that are entirely burned down, which is totally fitting with the myth. Not something I would have improvised myself, but now that I've rolled this, it makes total sense. And like I said, it emphasizes where the myth is already going.
The pool was an interesting one for me with the random table because it's a repeated use table. So every time someone drinks from the pool, what is the effect? I guess you could interpret it as you roll that once and that it has that effect every time, but I was re-rolling. And it can then reveal itself to the players as being something quite menacing, or maybe something that has positive outcomes. People might be eager to seek out the pool and drink from it, or they might be scared of like, how is this going to cause chaos in the realm if these effects are more widespread? That's a very random thing. You could have a benevolent pool that is giving blessings to everyone, which is a very different myth than the one that it's causing everyone to get old. I do think just as a structural thing, having an element of randomness on every myth, it tells you that there's no like canonical version of what this thing is. So someone who's reading the book and thinking, okay, do I need to pore over every detail, every sentence here and make sure I know the story here and who's who and what's going to happen? But the fact that there's a random table there tells you this is going to play out differently depending on whether you run it or someone else runs it, which I think teaches people a little bit about how to play the game.
The pool's also a good example of a table that you can always use because, like, I've incorporated in other myths as well, when they come across a strange body of water, I can use the pool effects in the moment, decide whether they have to roll or if I just want one of the blessings or curses to happen. I recently ran the troll, and in there you have like a mirror pond where they see reflections of something happening. And in that moment, I thought, okay, I know that I can come back to the pool table if someone, for some reason, drinks this water. And being very fitting for the troll, I could have something to do with fire breath. that's a cool example where I think that the table doesn't have to remain within the myth, and you can use it in others as well to emphasize how mythic your world is.
Yeah, I like that kind of injects multiple little mini ruins, right? Or that effect of like, hinting at another myth. So with that kind of approach, you're quite literally like, without incorporating it into your prep, hinting at, that effect in a fun way, which, yeah, I haven't thought to do that, but now I kind of want to do it.
So what I'm hearing is these 2d6 tables can be used in other myths. They can just be used as a cool ingredients that you add to your game. Brian is saying that it is Chris kind of raising his hands and saying, well, dude, it's your campaign. I can't tell you how the world is like. Another element of a myth is the cast. And the cast is very often just the information that you need to run combat, which I find a bit disappointing. A little bit of description, but very sparse, I would say. I would always love a little bit more, like a desire. But what I'm missing is something that gives me a handle on what do they actually want.
There have been some moments in my games where they come across, some of the cast of a myth. And then afterwards, I think, wow, I could have probably done more with that. And I think getting more used to the game and more used to Spark tables, I've alleviated that a little bit.
One of the absolutely beautiful things about the book is that the myths take up a single page. And there's such a delicate balance of information there. You could make the artwork smaller and give more space for the cast, but then you'd have the downside if you're making the artwork smaller. The Omens, I guess, do the heavy lifting of that's where a lot of the information is. Just looking at the plague. So Jolly Hunter McCann, so you get the name and you get the virtues and weapons, and not even a desire, which is something you get for, I think, most characters who appear. He is a jolly hunter. So you've got that single adjective. And then I presume in the Omens, you're going to get more detail. But it is very minimal. I'm comfortable with it because there's so many other tools available to flesh those things out.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar camp because the place that I usually end up at after reading the Omen, checking the cast member, is there's a question. There's like a shape of a question that has formed in my head, and it's enjoyable for me to answer that question, whether that's with the artwork, the poem, the sparks at the bottom, or the tables at the front of the book. But in terms of like you were saying, kind of that delicate balance of information, everything seems tuned just to the point where you have enough information to find your way to. Oftentimes, I don't know if this is true of every myth. I'd be interested in the data on this, but the question or the situation that's implied by the little 2d6 table at the bottom is relevant somehow. Like, it may not be a direct connection. Maybe it's the source of a rumor that this cast member is interacting with, but like, I kind of view the page as like a triangle. And sometimes it's weighted more towards the cast member. Sometimes it's weighted more towards the Omen. Usually at some intersection between those points, even if the details on the cast member are a little slim, that's a sign of, okay, cool, the clue is elsewhere. Go look in the other available elements to fill in the details.
And that is a brilliant point, because the Jolly Hunter does have a desire, which is he's infected, I think, or, shows mild symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously you already know how to play them. We're still at the plague. We can look around a little bit. There are the Purging Knights in the cast, and their information that is, I guess, really useful, other than all the cool stuff that they can do, the fire pots and the flail, and their stats. They hate each other. They are twins and hate each other. And that is obviously a cool setup to play them.
Yeah, the other element of it, and this applies to any game, but in this game that has such an emphasis on emergent story, you might be going through your prep and reading these things and thinking, this is going to be the big myth in this campaign, or that this is going to be, these characters are going to be the core characters. They're going to be really excited by the Purging Knights, whatever. You don't know what will happen when the players meet these things. And it might turn out that the Jolly Hunter becomes a key ally of the company. So if you were to give more detail on every cast member, it might imply something about their significance. And the significance is something that isn't really set in stone.
Yeah, I mean, that's to continue using the plague as an example. Dermot and Dunkus from the presentation seem like they're going to be really important. That sixth omen took place off screen for my players, but the implications of it showed up in the next holding that they went to, because the knight that was kind of controlling that place was very closely tied to Dermot and Dunkus, and one of our knights had previously established, like, oh, like I'm family with, this person that we're heading to this holding. So suddenly their like involvement in that omen, spoilers for my group, their deaths, right? And then reincarnations as these sort of like flame-like demons and stuff just absolutely obliterated the morale of the party, because everyone had this sort of like idyllic vision of their dynamic, how they were going to contribute to solving the problems. And they didn't even see them, right? And they were gone, let alone, I think, at the head of a legion of the undead coming from another realm. So like, again, what seems like they're going to be super important because we're directly going to interact with them just did not happen. But then that morphed based on the effects of, the plague and everything. So yeah, that's to me like why the question that it asks is almost more important than the actual information that's on the page, because then you get to do that cool spark synthesis thing that everyone talked about and find the point in the triangle between those two things where they intersect.
Yeah, I like that. So it's not so much an absence of information, or maybe it is, but it's the fruitful void that we now can fill with, whatever weirdness comes up in our game, rather than Chris telling us these are all the things that you have to know about the character before you can play them.
It's probably worth saying that in any given myth, it may develop so that there are cast members who are not described there who may be significant. If it develops in a certain way, if you're in a holding and you hear a rumor about something and you have some throwaway NPC who delivers this rumor, they're like, right, you're coming with us. The cast isn't exhaustive.
Again, using that same example, the old coot up front, easily one of the favorite NPCs, not listed, no details. They went to so many lengths to make sure he was okay.
I have run that first Omen twice, and both times the old coots, my players like talking to them so much that I kept them in the world, and that they're now places or people that the party likes to revisit and say, hey, how you doing, crazy dude?
Do you have other examples of NPCs from the cast that had become permanent fixtures in your campaign?
This will give you a clear indication of the detail in which I read the book. So in the Hydra, there's the Candle Knight, Alawain, and it is mentioned in the first Omen, the rest of her company were killed. So I read that and somehow skimmed over both the name of the Candle Knight and the gender and invented another take on the whole thing. And that was one of the first Omens I ran, though. But that Candle Knight joined the company in a big battle later and is a member of a council. They're one of the NPC knights that they're closest to. I think who players interact with early in their story can sometimes be quite significant. They're getting their bearings in the realm, and the people that they meet then might become more significant than you would expect.
When I ran the bull, one of the leaf-clad guard joined the company. So I made a character sheet with different feats. And now when I have my open table games, sometimes people select the leaf-clad guard, who has slightly more guerrilla warfare ideas behind it. So they play slightly different than the knights. But the funny thing is they can't gain glory.
So the NPC became a playable. Okay.
Yeah.
And Jessup, do you have a favorite NPC?
Yeah, in the third Omen of the Underworld, the Shrouded Smith forging the Cold Sword, materialized in this sort of dreamy forge floating on a lake on top of an enormous plateau on a crazy island. And something about the combination of when he appeared, how he appeared to the Lance Knight made it such that like they kind of like latched on to him as a, don't worry, like I'll come back and I'll ask you more questions later, right? Which to me, that seems very much like a cursory sort of, we're going to skim over this. Smith materializes, gives you a thing, and then disappears. But we have yet to see how that's going to play out in terms of the overall significance. But I found the Knight's reaction to that and like deciding that this throwaway character is now critical to their entire vibe as the Lance Knight. Like, oh, don't worry, I'll come back to you for repairs. Make sure to start making me this other cool thing. You know, we'll sync back up and follow up on this. Like, it's something I didn't expect, because usually when you get cool loot, it's like, okay, cool, thanks, goodbye.
The place is now a place in your realm.
Yeah, it's I don't think I've revealed the mechanics exactly, but it appeared basically under a full moon after I think someone had died. So now if there is a death on top of that thing underneath a full moon, then here he comes, and he's ready to make you something.
I think that is definitely by design. I remember Chris mentioning Breath of the Wild and moving through the world, and then by exploring the world, kind of unlocking useful locations that they can visit afterwards.
I kind of always assumed that even in the dreamiest moments, that there could be something concrete that's going to stick around afterwards, which I think has helped, you know, just again, looking for like concrete ways to connect things from Omens that might seem, again, like throwaway or just here's like a one-off thing. Like, what about this is going to stay? Whether that's like a person, an idea, a feeling, a place, an item. That, I think, was a really good shift for me, because when I had run things earlier, I was very much like, just put it out there and forget about it because we have more things to get to. But I found that people coming back to this source of another omen for guidance, help, or, you know, to uncover more clues is more likely to be the thing that the players are going to do.
It leads to an interesting question, I think, talking about what can remain after a myth, because when we're creating a realm, we create ruins. And I'm just wondering, how do you guys approach that? So you decide there's going to be a ruin in this hex, probably you roll a myth, and what's the next step from that?
I rolled a ruin, and then I tried to find a connection how that myth would have left that ruin behind, at least in some cases. I remember I had the plague as a ruined myth.
At the bottom of the plague, for example, it says ruin, burned village. The simplest thing to do when you're creating a ruin is connect that rolled ruin, burned village with the myth on the same page. I don't think you necessarily need to do that.
There must be like a blackened gallows or burned gallows on the bottom of the page. I used that. Okay. And then I imagine that the Purging Knights were burned there because they betrayed their oath or were hanged by angry villagers or whatever. And funnily enough, that came up when they resolved the mist. When they resolved the mist, they asked the seer, is there a place nearby where we can find a lot of bones? And I looked at the map and I saw the burnt gallows. And I thought, yeah, there's a place. And then they went there, burned the whole pile of bones, and the mist magically disappeared. In the cast, there's also stuff that they can use. So, for example, the much maligned Cudgel myth has tons of cool stuff that they can score that the cast members have. The hedgehog has these spikes that you can use as arrows, and you can burn the feathers of the hawk, leon, whatever that is, to do other cool stuff. So have your players ever found, useful objects among the cast members?
In the Citadel, there is this weird tower that appears, and the master of that tower, it's described in the cast that he has a crystal lantern that allows you to see remote places in the realm. And that character met a grisly end, and the company left with that lantern. It remains, it's there, it's something that could become a factor in the future, but it hasn't been a big focus.
Are you sometimes just rolling randomly on a prompt to see what kind of object they find? Some kind of loot? I'm doing the air quotations here. At the bottom of the page, there are the prompts, and the prompts are very often, as you just mentioned, part of the myth. Like either because a cast member has them as an object, or they are mentioned in the Omens. I do that sometimes when I want to reward exploration, for example, or some cool action they did. In the player post I'm running at the moment, a player stayed with a wounded white stag until it died. And then the next morning, I wanted an object lying there as a token of gratitude. So I rolled, I think Storm Ring is one of the objects that you can find. And that became a major thing. I haven't thought about what a Storm Ring is or what it could do, but it fit perfectly. And now they have a magic item. Is it something that you did?
For your players, especially when they're used to more like dungeon delving games, they want to explore stuff, they want to find stuff. And I found that is a really good, just give them a little something. It's not obvious how it's going to be useful, but it's kind of mythical in that sense. Yeah, I've done that quite a few times. And often I find with these objects is if you tell the players that this is what they find, if you give them like just a few seconds to think about it and you see like the spark in their eye and you say, oh, the river helm, it must be for swimming underwater. You've answered that question already.
I've used that on my end as well. The example that I'm thinking of right now is the Underworld, when some of the shrouded guides kind of materialized and pursued them and led to a bunch of drama. One of the players theorized that these were people that had been trapped on their way to the Underworld, somehow had been cursed to kind of ferry people back and forth between the two, and that their souls were like trapped in their lanterns, which I had just been like, cool, it, explodes, it gives you some blast. But now that is 100% in the lore of the setting because of something that the player was hypothesizing in the moment, just being like, ooh, I can't wait to get my hands on their soul. I'm like, you're right. Can't wait.
When you guys use the margin prompts, do you ever just, when rolling or when going through a myth, just look at the bottom of the page and just go with those? Because there is like some kind of synergy there? Or do you guys also, like me, just always roll up when you need something from the bottom of the page?
In the beginning, when there were only 12 myths, but they were already the prompts, I was super annoyed by the fact that you get the same thing twice. Like the stuff that is in the Omens and in the cast is then on the bottom of the page. And I was complaining, there's not enough. But obviously that was me being naive, because if you have 72 of these things, then it's a lot. But I roll randomly.
Yeah, I think it depends on whether I'm looking for something quickly during play or if I'm doing prep. I think in prep, I'm more likely to be jumping around through the book to different places or even looking elsewhere. And when I'm playing, I think it's helpful to have prompts that are related to the kind of the theme of the myth, but maybe like one or two steps away from it, just to spark some different ideas.
I'm in a similar spot where, again, kind of depending on my energy that day, right? If I feel like I can hop around and maintain the table, I'll, randomly roll across all of them. But other times I'll go specifically to the page of the myth if I just need something quickly. One thing I did want to say before we move away, because I just realized this, and I feel like this is a wild moment to capture. I'm looking at the worm specifically, and independently of anything that's on the page, I did a little bit of prep for a particularly investigative group of players because they really like world building and digging in and uncovering stuff and the exploration end of things. So I was like, okay, I need to challenge myself to just come up with something, whatever I'm feeling right now. It would be good for me not to feel like, I don't know, I have to stick with only the material that's in the book. I did not look at the thing that's at the bottom for the ruin. But what I came up with was a tomb constructed around an asteroid site where something had crash landed into the realm, birthing the worm from some kind of meteorite egg type thing. And I just looked and I see impact crater at the bottom of the page, and I'm a little freaked out right now. That's very surreal.
That's pretty weird.
If anybody is looking for evidence of the gap between the information paints a question in your head, I'm pretty sure that it just worked on me without me realizing it because I answered the question that I didn't know was at the bottom of the page.
But it's an interesting point that you would prep a little bit more to accommodate the table that you have. I think that is a good instinct.
They really wanted to dig into the background of things, and I wanted to use the stuff we'd established, the stuff that was on the page, clearly not the stuff at the bottom because I completely missed it, to sort of paint in a little bit more detail to give them more to go through. I found it very easy because the way that the Omens so far had painted a picture in my head left a very evocative empty space to play in.
Okay, we have skirted around the most important part of any myth, which is the omens. And now we have to talk about it. To me, it seems that omens progress in a certain way. You have the first couple of the first one or two that are more kind of vibey. And then we have the last two, which are definitely a confrontation. Is that how you would look at omens?
I think that's common across many of them, and there's also outliers that are a bit more unusual. The ones that maybe are a little less obvious how the players might engage with them or how the players might disrupt them. So the ones that are a little bit more traditional, that you can fight someone or negotiate with someone to convince them of some other outcome, I think fit what you're saying, that the introductory thing and then the later aspects.
Do you have an example of a myth where the omens are like completely different? The Glade, I guess. Can you talk about the wheel? We had the wheel. I think Kieran talked about it a lot, and Amanda as well. It changes the seasons, I think.
I mean, there's nothing stranger than just, oh yeah, big giant mechanical shift in the weather. Everything else typically provides something for the players to hook on to, something for them to interact with, something that establishes a little bit of place, a little bit of maybe a cast member or two, and then maybe a problem or a question. Whereas the season just drastically changing out of nowhere feels more like something the players experience, and there isn't a lot to go off of initially. So the way they engage with it might be a lot more speculative than direct interaction.
I've come to really like those kind of omens where it's not directly impacting the company, but it is, I don't know, you're kind of changing the rules a little bit, where the wheel forces you into this winter. The sun is one that I recently did where it's like night no longer exists. The sun just remains in the sky. And it's not something that is like an immediate impact on the company, but they now have to deal with the fact that they can't just camp outside anyway. Yeah. Or wildlife is going insane, or, like you have a lot of other things that come into play. I'm starting to really enjoy these kind of like passive omens that do change like a game rule, I guess is one way you can look at it.
If you think about omens more in a traditional, this is an encounter sense, then a lot of the omens don't do much. We can look at them in more detail, but because the omens always happen in a context, the cool vibey thing that is happening is then affecting how you interact with the next, maybe more actiony omen. So William mentioned that the omen might change the rule of the game, but they can't really interact with it. But then the next encounter will be in the darkness, for example, or in winter.
One that I remember from my game was about the ground feeling hot. The way I described it, it was a fairly gentle effect, and the players were aware of it, but more or less chose to ignore it because they were busy. And I think with those sorts of Omens, you kind of have a choice as the referee how much you'd lean into it. Are you just going to describe... Another one I remember was just music kind of playing through the air, and it's not clear where the music is coming from. Are you going to describe it as, here's a gentle thing that you notice that's weird? Or are you going to say the music is so loud, it's actually difficult to talk to each other, and it's kind of interrupting your conversation, or it's hard to concentrate on things? How much do you push it in front of them, and how much do you just place it there and let them choose for themselves?
Using that example of like the ground warming up, the knights ignore it because they're busy. To me, my brain immediately jumps to, okay, so what happens to the crops? What happens to all of the trees in the realm? What happens to all of the cold-blooded critters that would normally be hiding in the underground, I think that attitude of there's not a lot going on in these omens, there's nothing to interact with here, so on and so forth, really seems to come from an attitude of there's nothing to fight, there's nothing for me to loot, and there's nothing that increases my power level. Right? If you're coming in as like an empathetic knight that's part of a larger world, then suddenly something like the ground warms up can have massive implications for the realm, for everybody in it, for your status quo inside of it. So anytime someone brings up that point, I'm like, you're not thinking about what that could mean, man.
I take that as advice for myself now, because I didn't really stop in that moment to think about what the consequences would be of that being left unchecked. And that's a really interesting thread to pull on.
I do think it requires like a bit of in the moment ad-libbing. I had the omen where the ground was hot and it was in the evening. So I said to my players, like, your horses aren't going to be calm this evening. Camping out in the wilderness is going to be difficult because they're going to be getting upset that the ground beneath them is so weird warmth is emanating out. They're uncomfortable. Yeah. But I don't think it's easy to, in the moment, always come up with that kind of stuff. So
to be clear, this is very much towards the attitude from, again, like player-facing stuff. Like this is not directed at refs at all, I think.
I think there's potentially a good blog post there of like a checklist for consequences. Like, does this affect your comfort? Does it affect the local population? Something you can glance down through and think, where are the impacts of this?
Talking about checklists, though, you can judge encounters, or if you want, omens based on certain criteria. And the criterion I'm hearing now is, does it affect the players? Like, can the players just ignore the omen and choose to not interact with? Like, my advice in the past was always, if you have the right players, they will use that as a scene prompt or a story prompt. And they will now, when they roll themselves into their bedrolls, they will feel comfortable and maybe comment on that. For the referee, it doesn't have to be extra work, but it can be, obviously. Then there are also omens that they cannot ignore. If you have read the Sticky Goblins blog post by Patrick Stewart a couple of years ago, he designs his encounters so that players cannot ignore them. But that's not necessarily the way omens work. Would you agree? Or not all the omens work?
We're kind of talking about the consequences of not engaging with something. And if those consequences are too impactful, you choose to ignore the hot ground and the harvest fails and there's a famine. If it's as big as that, then the players may feel pressured with every single occurrence that they encounter. Like, we can't screw this up because people are going to die if we ignore that this tree has different colored leaves than the other trees, or whatever.
I think that is a good point, because as we mentioned a couple of times, there are always 6 myths kind of crying for attention. Yeah. And if the players have the feeling that every single omen pulls them in another direction, that can be very frustrating.
I'm kind of experiencing it a little bit in my game at the moment, because the players left one holding to go to another holding because of a kind of mundane occurrence that I rolled up that they were going to have to deal with. Because they're dealing with the kind of Dominion level stuff at the moment. So they go out and investigate this thing. And in the midst of that journey, a bunch of other stuff has happened to the point that it's almost comical how much is going on and how the struggle that they have to have with prioritizing which of these quite scary things that's currently happening do we focus on and what do we let slip? Those are interesting questions. And I think that actually does, simulation is too strong a word, but when you have more power and more authority in a realm, there should be hard decisions about what you focus on.
Yeah, I've even run into that during like the young wandering phase, where players had the realization that we can't do it all, right? We can't fix every situation, we can't address every imminent danger, and learning to like delegate or ask for help or petition holdings or other NPCs in the realm to do things led to some really cool and interesting moments. I think it's challenging for some players that are coming in with the expectation of being able to fix every problem and being able to like address every single myth and check off every single box of the situation that's going on. But I've found that even past that initial point of discomfort, usually there is like stepping into a new kind of play, which most people have seemed to enjoy. I think I've only had one person really kind of bounce off of that and say like, oh, that's not really for me. So I think it invites a very interesting kind of play when you get to that point of there's so much going on. The Omens have painted this tapestry that we can't go to every corner of. We have to pick which parts to pull on.
And I think it is useful to make the point in a session 0 to tell them, you will be pulled between mundane demands from the realm that needs to be protected. And also, different myths that need to be addressed. And I think, I don't know if you guys have watched the 3D6 Down the Line. They made a session 0 where the GM talked about that in detail, where he said, I want that to be the thing, and I want to have buy-in from the players so that you don't feel the frustration. And I think that is a really useful thing to tell the players.
So we're going to step through this wonderful encounter checklist from Prismatic Wasteland. And the idea is for us to analyze the omens of a myth from the book using this checklist. So we have 7 points to get to. The first one, is the encounter something that happens to the player characters? Second point, can the player characters play, quote unquote, with the encounter, i.e., is it toyetic? Point number 3, are there multiple possible solutions or no solution at all? Point number 4, do the player characters want something from the encounter? Number 5, does the encounter have a motive? Number 6, does the encounter have a means to accomplish its motive? And number 7, is there a consequence to ignoring the encounter? So, gentlemen, I believe we're going to look at the plague. Omen number 1. Let's do it. Is this encounter something that happens to the player characters?
An old coot proclaims their dreams, where foul air was choking people in their sleep, pleads for help, spreading the word.
I think in practice, it's hard for a company of knights to just wander on by when this is happening.
The old coot is either talking directly to the knights and saying, here's my dreams, or the knights are passing when they see the coot rushing around to everyone they can find. I guess those are the 2 ways to present it.
It would make more sense if the old coot directly talks to the knights, like grabs their coats and says, please. How was it in your campaign, Jesse? Because you had the plague, right?
It was actually a rumor that was delivered to the knights by the ruler of the holding. So, hey, the old coot is wandering around the holding, causing a bunch of problems. Please see to this. So it was a little bit more direct on my end than, they stumble into the environment and this thing is happening.
Doesn't seem toyetic in the in the sense that Prismatic Wasteland assumes. But can you see, like, is there only one way you can deal with that encounter?
I think there's a choice. Whose side do you choose? Do you side with this coot who says, please tell everyone about my dream? And then you start to try and spread the news of the dream. Or do you think this guy's going around scaring everyone with a weird dream? And then the problem is, how do you shut this guy up?
The encounter has a motive, I would say, right? Because the coot wants the knights to spread the word. I don't think that the lower status coot has any other means to accomplish their goal other than pleading, I guess.
There's a connection there, though, to the discussion earlier about ignoring things and the consequences. Because if the knights say, we don't care about this guy, and they ride away, the next time they're in this region, they might have this reputation of knights who ignore the concerns of the vassals, and maybe the plague has worsened since then, and they had a warning that they didn't heed. Impacting the reputation of the knights might be the only recourse that the old coot has.
The second omen, Moaning in the Mist, an ivy-cloaked shack, home to a dying old couple, their daughter left to search for treatment. That sounds already a lot more juicy than the first one. Definitely seems more toyetic than the first one in the sense that there are more ways to interact with it. The dying old couple, now the knights could show their compassion. They could try to treat them. They could try to, I don't know, make some tea or whatever. They could be scared because they are already aware of some kind of sickness.
The players that I'm familiar with, I think this is the point where they would start thinking about what's the cure to this plague. The solution part comes to the fore here. In the previous Omen, you attend to the old coot and you put him at ease in some way. But here, I think you're going to get people talking about, okay, do we know any healers? Do we go to a seer? Do we inspect the dying couple? And is it safe to inspect the dying couple, or might we risk getting sick ourselves? So I think the solution element is the most important one here.
Okay, we had the first two omens that we were assuming are more vibey and theme setting. And now Jolly Hunter and his song with mild symptoms, chasing a smiling fox up a tree. They don't believe in the plague, but claim the fox is a harbinger of death. The smiling fox wants to witness a death. That is very ominous.
Yeah, it's really good for like setting the tone of this plague, killing people, laying them to waste.
The fox seems to be quite important here. I think coming to this, you could easily think, well, clearly the fox is behind everything, and fixate on that and spend the next couple of days chasing a fox through the forest, which I think is great. Definitely ticks the toyetic box for me.
I think that one of the things that's interesting about this checklist to me, it's popped out on this one and the previous Omen to me, is number 4. Do the player characters want something from the encounter? And a lot of, at least in these cases, it doesn't seem like something that they would want to like acquire or something like that. But if they truly want to protect the realm, if they want to seek the myths, if they want those like concrete directives, then that seems to be the thing that is pulling them into it. Alternatively, I could also see they want to understand, like understanding, knowledge, that sort of thing could pull someone in. So if you see a really enigmatic and strange interaction between some residents of the realm and also a wild harbinger of death, or just a cute fox, you know, that's that's reason enough to go chasing.
For friends of actiony omens, finally we can fight something, maybe. A self-important knight and 2 squires returning to report the plague to the seat of power demands escort from other knights. And then they carry a grey lantern, its light only visible to the carrier. Well, maybe you don't find them, but you could, I guess, refuse to accompany them.
It seems like something that might lead to a duel. We demand your escort. We refuse. Well, let's settle this as knights.
I like the fact that they have the attribute self-importance that already makes them very unsympathetic.
Yeah.
And cool to roleplay as a GM.
One interesting thing about the way that it's worded is there's no confirmation that what they're going to report is true.
Yes.
Right? Could be like, oh yeah, I heard there's a plague. Instead of the gold lung, it's the green fungus that grows out of your ears. Like, what if that's not how the plague is manifesting in your realm? What if he's just attention seeking and trying to be the first one to get news to the seat of power, right?
But this is definitely a sticky encounter in the fact that they really can't ignore. The same status, it's a knight, even self-important knight. They demand that you help them. And that could also be like a cool reflection for the knights. How do they see themselves within the realm?
Does it have multiple possible solutions? The only thing I can think of is someone needs to go to the seat of power to deliver the news, and maybe who goes? But they've demanded an escort, so I mean, the solution they want is that everyone goes, which can be very disruptive. You could be anywhere in the realm, and then they say, okay, now we're going here. And then you're traveling with two companions and encountering other omens. It would direct the play in a completely different way for quite a while.
Maybe the players can worm their way into his good books in such a way that he owes them a favor.
And we have already 4, 5, 6 NPCs that could stay with the campaign for some time.
4 omens into this, I think some players will be saying, what the heck can we do about this plague? I have no idea what to do, because there's nothing that's been presented to them that looks like an overall solution. You know, they've encountered these omens, and for them, the plague is their priority. At this point, you would kind of hope that they've come up with some kind of plan. They have been discussing, how can we deal with the plague? Do we need to appease nature through some ritual or something? Or do we need something more like early scientific? Or maybe we need to lock up all the important people in the seat of power and make sure they survive while everyone else dies, you know, if you want to go real dark with it. I'm thinking about, we're treating each of these as a distinct encounter, and how does it meet the checklist? But they all tie together as well.
Oh, definitely. I don't think that every omen is a classic encounter that have to meet these requirements. Because Jesse already said, there are knights. Their motivation is to help the realm. So one of these points will be met anyways. And also omens have other functions. Introducing the theme and, you know, functioning as a story beat is as important as being a classic encounter. But I think Chris did say that he tried to have the omens to meet at least one requirement between, what was it, sticky, chewy, and crunchy, I think. And I think that the next one is probably the one that will make a lot of players who like actiony stuff even more happy. A clearing, bonfire embers, an infected crowd close to death, full of anger. They swear a blood oath on the stump of a red oak, seeing visions of revenge. They attack any caught watching.
It seems like this is when the scale of the plague manifests for the first time, like an actual group, like a community of people, a group of people, a large body that have been infected by whatever's going on. And part of me wonders if this is there as, like, you know, since it's the first myth in the book, it's likely one that folks might just grab because it's up there. Mm-hmm. Where this is the, like, hey, your knights have probably wandered around and they might not have all of the threads put together and they haven't really taken it seriously. And this is the moment where that point of friction meets them, and it's kind of something that you can't ignore or walk away from. So I'm wondering if this is there as, like, I know fire is featured heavily on the plague, but this is like the spark that ignites all of the ramifications and implications of the plague, which is why it's a little bit more, it's less flexible. It's like a point of, like, if you were looking for a clear point of there's the build up to the plague and now we're in it, here you go.
I think it's worth mentioning again that the omens are not only encounters, they are also part of a story and part of an escalation. And I think what you're saying is this is definitely the point where it escalates.
It feels like it tilts almost past that point.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, I find it actually one of the best omens so far, provided you are traveling with the self-important knights, because then you get to have the knights act upon these people. And that is a moment where I think that your PCs can choose to help this blundering idiot who's charging straight forward into this crowd of people, or if they just want to let him go and just see how it plays out.
This is a moral dilemma, probably made worse when they are accompanying the knight.
It paints a question, right? The visions of revenge, right? Why do they want revenge? What are they after? Are they after the holding because they didn't come to their aid and attempt to find a cure? Is this, inherent within the disease? Is there like a magical or mythical cause for that desire of revenge? That part of it, I think, is a great opportunity to fill in whatever angle on the myth you feel is like lacking at the time, because then you can provide kind of that paradigm shift of everything snaps into focus from a couple of different threads. And it's only 4 words? It's pretty good.
Seeing visions of revenge, that sounds mystical to me, right? That is not just they are delirious, or is it? I don't know.
It describes the action, right? They are like the angry infected are seeing these things. Is it real? Is it being put on them? Is it part of the disease? Is it the manifestation of their, vindication against becoming infected? Like, there's so many cool ways you could go with that.
Players may have done a lot of speculation by the time you get to this point about what's causing this, and is it a force of nature or does it have even some kind of religious element to it? Having listened to what they speculate, or if they go to a seer and something gets rolled up about what's going on, I feel like at this point I'd probably have a good idea about another aspect to this plague that hasn't been written down here, that there is something more tangible that could be done, or maybe a motive behind it that is not fully revealed, or something that could be done potentially to stop it.
William, you had mentioned this before, like drawing connections between myths and having them kind of involved with one another. This was the point in the rollout of the plague that it hooked onto the demon, because previously they had stumbled into the guys dancing around the bonfire, right, having a great time. And it was quite literally a 1-2 punch of they see the bonfire, they see everybody dancing, they, engage in a bloody battle, and then boom, there's a group of infected folks around a red oak swearing revenge. And they're like, oh no, we caused this by killing the boys dancing around stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. The plague and the demon are now linked 100%.
Amazing. And then we have the last omen. An infected village, the root of the plague. All are visibly infected. The 2 purging knights, who, by the way, hate each other, charging to cleanse with flame. I mean, if we go to the list, well, does it happen to the player characters?
I feel this falls in the category again of officially not really, but since it's the game we're playing, I don't see knights who would just see this happen and go, oh, well, we're moving on.
Yeah, they have sworn the oath. And I think, there are 2 solutions or at least 2 solutions that I see. There's the moral dilemma of, we need to eradicate the plague in order to save the realm, or we cannot kill innocent people and burn them alive.
Like you said, knights would clearly not ignore this. In my campaign, they absolutely did, but only because they were being pursued by the horde from the previous omen. So that point of, it's not affecting us, we're having to move past it. There was a lot of turmoil internally about doing that because they felt the implications of breaking their oath in that moment. Moving past that and then finding out all of the implications afterwards had a huge effect, even though they walked by it.
That is the checklist point 7. Are there consequences of ignoring the encounter?
Yeah.
So that was a fun exercise. I think my last question about this would be, how do you resolve this? So I think we heard already a couple of ideas. It could be that the myth is naturally, through the course of playing, intersecting with another myth. And in Jess's campaign, I don't know, probably when they defeat the demon, the plague would go away, I would assume.
What it seems like right now. Well, I'll let you know when they get around
Oh, strong on. Okay, spoiler alert for Justice Players.
to it.
William, you also played the plague.
I've gotten to Omen 3 on the first time I ran it and Omen 5 on the second time I ran it. So what I have now is there's this island in the southwest of the map and it's just constantly under the plague.
What if your player characters go to a seer and they ask them, please, oh seer, there's this terrible plague. What can we do?
At the time, I had the troll was also active, and the seer essentially asked them to take some troll meat to the island with the plague, and the regeneration DNA, whatever, of the troll would help rebuild those who are infected.
But they would give them advice, like actually useful, intelligible advice.
Kind of. It was filtered through a bit of symbolism and obscurity when I gave it to the player.
From Brian, I hear something like, the players will have had their speculations and you will kind of embrace that. Is that true?
I expect that's what would happen with my players. But I'm just been looking at the page to see what else is available for us to use here. And the poem begins with birthed in air spread by stream, which if that were revealed to them, that gives you something to work with. In terms of spread by stream, okay, that means maybe it's in the drinking water.
That is what the 2d6 table will tell you, how it is spreading, right?
You have the poem that says spread by water, and then in the 2d6 is like transmission, could be something else. It creates this image of how the poem is what people will say about it, whereas the 2d6 table is more like the reality of it.
I don't know. I see it playing out in two ways. Either at the table, ideas emerge about what can be done about this, or the plague kind of runs its course. And maybe, that also covers the idea that the purging knights have their way and they, purge as many infected as they can. The third option is that you go through all the omens and the players still feel very much like the plague is a worry, and that, every now and then you might encounter someone who's infected. And then you get into the complex question of what does it mean to say it's resolved or not?
That is a brilliant segue. So let's assume the players decided to not burn the village, whether or not that helps. They have clearly not resolved the myth. The infected are still in the village. You ask the players, do you think the myth is resolved? And they will probably say no. Like, do you write more omens, for example? That is a possibility. Do you just think through what would it mean if there's a village of infected and the plague will keep on spreading?
I think for my part, because I ended up with a combination of the demon and the plague, that's kind of one whole situation. So for me, it's much more, there's more glory at stake should the knights go on and solve that entire situation. But other stuff that kind of came out of that is the holdings now have threads, omens, whatever you want to call them, that are now like ramifications from the effects of the plague. Like, oh, this settlement is now kind of overrun in a borderland between the plague lands and the rest of the realm, and that is taking up a huge amount of resources from the seat of power. So that thread is now a consequence of everything that's going on that's separate from the myths. So it's like it's spawned a new thing almost. In my mind, I would either reach for that solution of an additional string of however many omens in that myth you want to get up to, or look for ways to like insert the threads into other locales that are affected by the outcome of however the myth shook out.
I think I like the second option for myself, that I would just look at the fictional world, the thing that is left behind, unresolved, and see how it affects the realm and just go with it.
Looking at the rule, when the group feels that a myth is resolved, the knights gain 1 glory and the new myth replaces it in the next season. So we go through the 6 omens of the plague. We ask the players, is it resolved? But they say no. So you still have a myth hex. Is that the case with the plague? Do you add a new myth because you haven't cleared it away? Or are you now down to 5 active myths and a blank? It's clear to me what it means when you write new omens, because there's rules for that. Like, writing new omens isn't necessarily easy, but you have rules for how to handle them. But if you choose instead not to write new omens, but to make it just an ongoing concern, and it will have impacts and people will be talking about it, but without actual omens, then how are you handling the travel role?
I would add another myth, I think. And that is not rules as written. I'm aware of that. But to me, it doesn't feel like a problem. My instinct is always look where the fiction goes. I could see to maybe write more omens, but I would probably be happy with have the effect of the myth still be around, and beginning of the next season roll a new myth.
I have tried writing new omens for a myth that's ongoing, and we have 72 carefully written myths that have a consistent tone and a consistent feel. And as soon as you start introducing different stuff, I mean, you know what works best for your game, but there is a risk that you sort of skew things in a different direction, or introduce something a bit strange. So I do think it's good to have multiple options for dealing with, and not just get to a situation where, because you have a stubborn group, you're now onto Omen 12 and Omen 14 and Omen 23, and then you're now just playing quite a different scenario because you've gone off book with everything. And so I do think the idea of shifting it into a different type of object in the game makes sense to have that available as well.
And then the other question is, what do we do when the players fail at resolving the myth? Do we have an example for that?
I've got one for the dead. They did not stop it from marching on the holding, and the whole realm is cursed now.
That's so cool.
It's a bad place to live.
And when you say cursed, they're walking dead everywhere? Is that the curse?
There is a Lich King on the seat of power, marched on it with like magic rock, big rock golem creatures and everything. They were not able to stop him from, rising to this thing. And somewhere in the lore of the seat of power, we'd established that it's like a very old throne that's, probably primordial in some way. Mm-hmm. And so him getting in there and just like sitting down does that sort of Narnia thing, right? Where it like blankets the realm in like winter and that sort of thing. So as soon as he got in there, did his thing, game over, winter settles in. The undead have like taken up a spot in that keep. And I think their forces got routed too during combat. So this is all very nitty gritty ramifications of combat, of the omens rolling out, of the lore that they had previously established. They would speculate about something and I'd grab maybe a detail or two and hook it onto the existing stuff and then just slowly build it. And so now that open table that I'd been running is the realm over from that. So now things are trickling over from cursed Lich King realm into another one. So they've got their 6 myths, the demon, the worm, all that stuff with the plague jamming up against the current situation over there. And then just every once in a while for one of those like travel rolls between realms, one of these little undead legions or something gets lucky and makes it through.
Wow.
That sounds absolutely amazing. One could imagine that further down the line, the players assemble 2 warbands and march towards the seat of power of the other realm.
Yeah, absolutely. There are folks that might dream of doing that because they've heard enough talk about this undead king to the east, but they're like, but before we do that, we have to make sure that everyone's alive and not a demon and subject to this horrible golden lung plague thing, which they're still trying to figure out.
When you finished the 6th omen, did you ask the question of, has this been resolved? While this Lich King is sitting on the throne, did you say, is it now resolved?
Yeah. They opted out of glory, actually. They didn't opt out of resolving the myth because they're like, oh, it's clearly done because he's here, he's real, he's not going anywhere. But they're like, but we don't deserve glory. Like, we mucked up the whole thing and now it's winter here. We haven't gotten back to that part of play, so it's unclear whether or not other people consider them to be, glorified because of what they did. But mechanically, they were like, nope, not taking one.
We've already talked a little bit about that you could add more omens if you feel the myth is not resolved. But have you ever wrote a custom myth because something in your campaign came up that just you couldn't handle in a mundane way? And I think, Jesse, you wrote actually a couple of myths for your game. What was the motivation to do that?
Yeah, we had a new player join one of my closed table games, and just through natural conversations about like, what does because this is the same group that suffered the fallout of the dead, right? Assuming control of the realm. And they were like, well, we have to run somewhere. So we had kind of established that there was a series of islands to the northwest. They ran in that direction, and through conversations about, cool, what have you been doing in the months that it took to get here? How does this new night fit into the picture? There was a really cool opportunity to hook on a lot of courtly drama, right? Families of ruling families of the Isles, raiders who were like indigenous to the area, some weird, strange ruins and towers floating out on the ocean, like just cool stuff. And a lot of what the players had come up with was so interesting to me that I didn't really have a way to then go, okay, cool. And here is a myth that, one-on-one's on top of the current situation that y'all have discussed. So that led to me writing myths for the sea wolves, the salt spire liches. Those are like the weirdo, magical critters of the area. Someone just did like a throw off comment of like, oh yeah, there's like probably, some harpies to the west or something. I was like, yep, they have an island and it's now mythic. That was early too in game development. I think it was before Chris had wrote the Holding Threads blog post. You've like, oh, use it for seats of power and courtly drama and stuff. So my brain just went, okay, cool. I'll use that same scaffold of here's 6 things that are likely to happen if the players don't do anything. And, here's some cast members, items, locations, sites, that kind of stuff to just mix into the batch.
When you wrote the omens, did you have like a general structure? Also, the first one shouldn't be too involved, let's say, and the later ones will have the consequences of ignoring them?
I do find that things are easier to work with when they have that sort of escalation. I think I've tried in writing them to not be quite so literal as like the first 2 are conversations and then the next 2 are battles. And then the last one is some big thing that the players can't control. And I know it sounds like a cop-out, but the escalation was just me trying to have an honest conversation with myself about this setting and like, okay, based on all of these factors, what is the next most likely thing to happen and how does that hook on to other bits? The one thing I did that was different than the way that omens are structured in the book is I wanted them to be variable so that folks could come back to them and maybe get different results. So usually it would start with like a line of, there's salt spire liches out on the water floating above, the foggy depths below, and they're doing, colon. And then I would have an option for like on a 1 to 3 of a D6 roll, this is what they're doing. And on a 4 to 5, this is what they're doing. And on a 6, this is what they're doing. All of which were then connected out to the other myths in the area. So you get that bungee cord effect of, oh, it hooks on to the Tempest this time. Oh, nope, this one hooks on to the Harpy. So it's a little bit more dynamic. But again, the escalation was usually to some kind of logical conclusion based off of, again, the current situation. But I will be the first one to admit I rewrote things as the players would do stuff. Like if it became completely impossible and it was no longer relevant, I was like, okay, what is now the most likely thing that this would end with based on the current situation? So I didn't view mine as static. They were more organic. And if it felt like something needed to change because that person just isn't in the mix anymore, cool, let's swap it out with something that's more relevant.
I wrote 2 myths where I thought something is going on in the fiction that I cannot otherwise monitor or treat. Something came up in the world, and normally my inclination would be you look at the fiction, but if it goes into the magical kind of realm, into supernatural stuff, then I think it makes sense to write like a specific myth for that specific situation. Has anyone tried the holding thread, the blog post that Jesse was just mentioning, where you do the opposite? So you don't do the mythical stuff. You try to treat the mundane like a myth. So you have the 6 omens. The rules are a little bit different. I think you roll when they are in the holding. It's only rolled after the morning phase, and it can progress in the absence of the nights.
I knew the characters were going to a holding, and it was the biggest holding in the realm, and there was going to be more things happening, and I wanted to give a bit of structure to what was happening there. So I plotted out a 6-point progression of a kind of a faction conflict, different political factions trying to take sway in the holding. And I was just using it as they traveled around within the holding. They're going from this area to this area. If I needed something, I would just take the next one and use that. And it worked pretty well, but it would not have lasted beyond a session or two because I was just giving the next item in the list quite quickly. Whereas with the holding thread mechanic, you're going day by day, and it's not even certain, I think, that you'll get the next one unless you roll a certain value. So I think holding threads make a lot of sense for longer term unveiling of something within a holding, whereas what I was doing was a bit too accelerated, maybe. It was more like trying to give flavor to the location while also giving some information about who the powerful groups are there.
I took this into another game, Electric Bastion Land, and it was the faction rollout of different groups within the borough of the city. But the way I was treating it was very much like the holding thread of like, oh, if you wander over into their neighborhood, there's a chance that the next situation with them is kind of rolling out. So mechanically, it's very close to it, but in Mythic Bastion Land proper, not yet.
I think I don't know what the advantage is. Like, over just saying, I have these factions, they have these plans. Maybe I roll whether the plan works or not. Like, what does the structure add?
Yeah, I think it's a good bridge between folks that feel like they need the support of something like a myth, but don't quite feel comfortable with the luck roll and the spark tables approach. It's a natural way to kind of do a little bit of both because it's uncertain whether it'll roll out, but it gives you enough to kind of nudge people forward and, create momentum in the situation.
When you are writing something like a holding thread, you're thinking a little bit more about maybe the objectives of the people involved. It forces you to say, where do they want this to go to? So you potentially will think through the context in a bit more detail than you would if you just say, okay, in this holding, the son of the ruler wants to take over, so he's planning to kill. That's a concept that you can roll and say, oh, he rolled, he killed him. But if you force yourself to say, what are the 6 steps here? Who else is he involved in the conspiracy? Is there anyone else who has found out some evidence of this, but no one believes them? You kind of, it forces you to flesh something out.
I remember when this blog came out, I wondered what's the benefits of something like this over something more akin to the clocks from Forge in the Dark, where if you want something to happen, there are like these 6 steps, and each time one of them triggers, I guess it wouldn't be directly a scene, but then something that the knights do will be influenced by this. But I just feel like in Mythic Bastion Land, something like that would make more sense than the way that these are written down in like the myth syntax.
I think what Brian said, it is a bit more structured. Like a clock is not necessarily tied to something that they see. You would have to draw conclusions and maybe bring it on screen, if you will. Whereas if you think beforehand, what are the escalation ladder steps? It's probably easier to just pull out at the table, I would assume.
My implication was there'd be some hybrid between clocks and what Chris has done here, that I think would be more, at least it would work in my games better.
The clock is like a representation of like tension or momentum. So when you look for like a spark, you can get a very quick sense of like, oh, that's a 2 out of 6 segment clock. So things are chill, or maybe things haven't been revealed yet. Whereas, if you go to a holding and it's like, it's at 5, then the opportunity for everything to spiral out of control is right there because you've just got ticks on a clock. Yeah, I love clocks. Clocks are great.
You do have the potential in a kind of a fairy tale setting to have something in the world that acts as that clock. Like there's a tree in this holding, and every time a leaf falls from the tree, people know that something's getting worse. And you can just say there's 4 leaves on the tree.
That ties in quite well with the first holding thread that Chris listed, a sickly throne, where the ruler is getting sick over time, and having that symbolizing a clock and then represented by what else is going on, that would work really well. And it's like Jesse said, you arrive at the holding, the clock's on 3 already. That gives you tons of information. The dude is sick. The tree in the courtyard is faltering. The small folk are worried about it as well.
I don't see how that is not just a myth. I mean, that is clearly Amfortas, the Grail King, being sick, and now the Fisher King, and now the realm is sick. That's exactly that. How is that not a myth?
Because the clock you can draw in under 5 seconds. So
I think the reason is because it's stationary in the holding. I think that's the big difference.
Right. I know this has kind of been a theme of like a lot of my points so far, but like depending on my energy, I'll reach for the tool that kind of matches where I am in running the game. There's so many things going on that I'm struggling to keep up and to accurately represent that stuff. I might reach for something like a clock because I know I can lean on it as just a quick shorthand for here's a general vibe in this current situation. Whereas if I'm fresh in a campaign, I might be more likely to write stuff like holding threads because I've got a lot of energy. It's, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed right at the front.
In our last segment that we like to call You Be the Judge, somebody will bring up an interesting situation from their game, and the others will try to figure out how to resolve it. In my game, the knights crossed a bridge, and there was a bridge knight on it. The bridge knight, maybe an interesting detail, is a Fey knight, so they have to obey the Fey rules. But they're also a bridge knight, which is they will not let the players pass unless they are challenged to a duel. All right. So one of the player characters suggested the game of 3 truth. So not a violent duel. You say a truth about the other knight, for example, or the world, some truth. And if it is true, you score a point, so to speak. And if it is not true, you don't score the point. And there will be a winner and a loser, right? In the game of 3 truth. So let's say I play with Brian. I say, Brian, you are feeling tired right now. And then you say, now you're full of shit. I'm full of energy. I win.
And you take turns, so each person has to suggest the truth.
Yes.
Okay.
So first, the Fox Knight told the truth about the Bridge Knight. That was right or wrong. And then the Bridge Knight told a truth about the Fox Knight. That was the first round. And then you have 3 rounds. How would you handle that mechanically?
This is not me giving my answer, because I'm not sure I have something yet. But just the first thing that comes to my mind is, as the referee, it's interesting. It's an interesting situation because you have a lot of information. The player is familiar with the world, they're familiar with their own character, but the referee potentially knows more and can draw on more truths.
If you want to have it in a gamey way, the truth itself would become true under circumstances. So if they say, I don't know, I think that you are, possessed by an evil demon. I don't know that, whether or not that is true. That should be revealed by playing the game.
Sure. But what I mean is, like, for example, the knight who makes the challenge, you as the referee know that this knight killed someone last season and he regrets killing them.
Okay, true.
And the character who you're portraying may not know that, but that you may just insert that into their mind somehow.
Well, I'm not an asshole.
I really like making players gamble with their stats for really attractive opportunities to like have high impact. So I think I'd probably have to hash out the finer details a little bit more, but I think I would go with something like, okay, you can make a very clear truth statement about this strange Fey Knight that's on the bridge in front of you, but it's going to cost you 1d8 clarity, right? And make the amount of clarity that they're going to spend uncertain. Or if you don't want to go that route, leave it up to fate and give me a clarity save. And then have that wager on the table for each truth as they continue forward. And then you could do the same thing with the other knight as well, right? They roll up their clarity, see how, wise they are up front. And then every time they make a statement about the player's knight, same thing. Like, leave it variable so that the stakes of whether they have the upper hand or the lower hand is uncertain and kind of up to fate, but still hook it onto that same concrete element of like, if they run out of clarity before the player knight, then cool, their last answer is going to be incorrect, and maybe there's a chance the other knight wins. Or alternatively, if you're doing the save mechanic method as well, maybe they make the choice to spend clarity up front, and then they're so low that they're like, well, I don't want to become, what's the effect of clarity and impaired? No, that's spirit. Exposed, right? Whether they want to make that trade or not of, okay, I don't want to spend it, so now I'm rolling under a very low amount. That could be very fun because then it keeps the tension of you don't know which one the other knight is doing. And then the player gets all of that fun of like, what do I do, guys?
As Jesse was giving that, I quickly jotted down my answer. So this is how I think I would do it. The person asking the question has to first state the binary without stating which side you're going. Then the other player would write down the likelihood. Then I will say what I think is true.
Likelihood as in a percentile likelihood, like 20%?
I would make it a roll out of D6. So like a 3 in 6 chance. I say, Horst, I think you are jealous of Brian. And then you'd say, well, the knight on the bridge the likelihood is quite high. So it's a 4 in 6 chance that this knight is indeed jealous of Brian. I would call which side it goes on after you've written down, not shown me, but written down the likelihood. And then afterwards we roll and we see if the roll corresponds with if it is what I called or not. Probably just to keep with an example to make it more clear. So I'll say to Horst, I think you're jealous. I'm going to tell you something about whether or not you're jealous of Brian. You write down that there's a 4 in 6 chance you are indeed jealous of Brian. After writing that down on a note, I then say, what I call out is, you are indeed jealous of Brian. Then you reveal to the table the likelihood, and then we roll for it. So there's still a chance you roll 1 or 2, in which case it's like, no, actually, in the fiction, Knight Horst is not jealous of Brian. But if you roll a 3 or higher, then he indeed is, and then I score a point.
I like that approach of like, you get people to write things down before revealing like the uncertain element. I've used that in some games for like initiative actions, right? When it's simultaneous actions, it's like, oh, here's, let me jot down before you all strategize about what they're going to do. Okay, cool. Go ahead and talk. I like that. That's cool.
There's a cool betting mechanic in Whitehack where I think it's called auctions. And you can use it for all kinds of things, for chases and so forth.
Something I feel like I would probably turn to and lean into in the moment is observation. Mm-hmm. The character is presented with the bridge knight and they think, I need to find something that's true about this bridge knight. So imagine a truth about the bridge knight and give some evidence, about like the bridge knight is poor, and you can see that his cloak is very worn and, his boots need to be repaired. And in this way of doing it, I'm not even thinking of rolling. It's just like you're giving clues.
Which is very OSR, but it also puts a lot of pressure on the referee to describe interesting details that don't give everything away, but a little bit.
Yeah.
So it would be challenging. So the way we did it was relatively simple. The player would make a statement. We rolled a clarity save, so the player had the ability to just introduce new elements about the world, which was pretty cool. But if they failed, then they would also acquire a spirit loss of 6. So I didn't want the clarity roll and the clarity loss to be connected, because otherwise you have the death spiral and you lose the first round and then you will lose all the other rounds. But I also wanted kind of a timer of there's something at stake other than not being able to cross the bridge. At the end, the Game of Three Truth was way better than a normal duel would have been, I have to say.
Were there any interesting truths introduced about the player character? Like something that became true because of this game?
So they are in Elfland, which I have mentioned before, and one of the player character's son has been spirited away by the elf and has become some kind of prodigy of the elf and is now starting to weave spells. And the Bridge Knight said, "You are afraid that the son has lost his humanity and has become more fey." And that is now true. Listeners, I am thanking my co-hosts, Brian, Jesse, and William, for being the best co-hosts ever. For Jesse to having a incredibly sexy beard and a sexy voice. And you all for listening. Until next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.